Hey everyone, welcome back to the Girls in Action podcast. This episode is a conversation about women's representation in the media. I'm Melissa.
I'm Nava.
I'm Brianna.
And I'm Naya. We have a guest here with us today who we hold very dear to our hearts, Hénia Belalia. So over the summer, we participated in the Girls Task Force with the About Face, and that is actually how we started the podcast. Hénia has been a huge support to the podcast even after the program ended. Hénia is a French-Algerian educator, a writer, a theater director, a theater of the oppressed practitioner, and a grassroots community organizer. She has been working with youth for about 20 years in many capacities, both inside and outside of schools. In her free time, she loves to spend time in nature, get lost in books, dance, cook, and live her best life as an auntie. She's currently the director of programs for About Face.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Enya. How are you doing?
I am so excited to be on this podcast with y'all. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So glad you could be here with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do with About Face?
Sure. So I always say that the Bay raised me, even though it did not birth me. I moved here when I was about 10 years old. My background is in theater, and I've always loved stories, hearing stories, telling stories, getting lost in stories. So it felt like just a perfect natural transition into this job with About Face, which, to be honest, turned out to be the best job I've ever had. At About Face, we run media literacy, meets social justice workshops for teenagers, especially girls and gender expansive youth, ages 12 to 18 all over the Bay. So basically, I get to talk to youth all day about social issues that matter to them. I get to break down stories that impact them and then inspire them and give them the tools that they need to take up all the space and use all of the tools at their disposal to tell their own stories. I honestly feel blessed and grateful every single day to be doing this job.
Thank you for sharing with us. We're so excited to have you here for this conversation about media representation and what we as young girls can do to push back against toxic media messages, right? So during our summer program with you, we dove into all of the toxic messages that come through specifically with Disney movies and the damage that these messages do to the young audiences that the movies cater to. So like the princesses always needing to be rescued by a male hero, they themselves aren't smart enough or strong enough or emotionally stable enough to bring themselves out of a tough situation. And why are we showing this to 5-year-old girls, right? That's concerning.
I totally agree. And for example of some movies, in Sleeping Beauty, Aurora needs a prince to wake her up from her sleep. And there's a similar story in Snow White. In Cinderella, she needs a prince to free her from the slavery of her evil stepmother. All of these stories consist of a prince or a man saving a princess. These stories represent the princesses as cheery, pretty figures that need a prince to save and rescue them. The storyline instills the wrong values in the young audience that watch these movies. Women are very capable and don't need a man to continuously save them.
And almost all of these princesses are white. While there are a couple of Disney princesses of color, Pocahontas, Mulan, Tiana, Jasmine, they are often shunted to the side of the white princesses.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, if we're moving beyond Disney and the cartoons, even just looking at movie and TV and film in general, there's this huge lack of representative female protagonists. And I say representative because even though we've had a bit of a rise in having female protagonists in the mainstream media, like Katniss Everdeen or Bella Swan, all of these people are still very thin, white, straight girls that live up to Eurocentric beauty standards, right? And so when I say we need representative female protagonists, I'm saying we need women in those roles who represent all of the beautiful girls who are watching these shows and not just the thin ones and the white ones, right?
Exactly. And just like at times, we don't really even notice that underrepresentation is happening. And as a society, we're like absolutely dreadful at judging that comparative airtime for those male and female voices. For example, I've like seen on places like Reddit where like people name 10 or 20 classic novels with female protagonists. And like that's they're showing that there's like proof that there are plenty of good books for girls, like, but what they're not including is the hundreds and thousands of books with those male protagonists as a comparison. And it just happens when people talk about movies too, as you said, Brianna. Like naming a couple of films with those female leads, it just really doesn't prove anything. Like, we're still living in that world where over 70% of those lead characters in films are male. And even in movies with female protagonists like Frozen and The Hunger Games, male characters speak more than female characters. So Enya, I know that a lot of the work that you do is actually working alongside young girls, like what you're doing right now by being on this episode. How does that lack of accurate representation and role models, how does that affect young women and girls?
It's such a good question. I think it's so important to look at when we're looking at stories, it's always important to look at what stories are being told, who's telling the story, and then also what stories aren't being told. There's a saying that says, you can't become what you can't see. And I mostly agree with that statement when it comes to
Mhm.
representation. Although I do want to say, obviously, there's exceptions, right? And I don't want us to believe like if you can't see something, then you can't become something.
Yeah.
But how could it not be extremely detrimental to a young girl's psyche to see such few options offered to them, right? For a lifestyle, for a career, or even a relationship. Like Naya mentioned, we're literally taught as kids and as young girls that it is okay for a man to kiss us while we're sleeping without our consent, as long as it's a prince and there's a happily ever after ending. And so many of the stories that we get are those. And so the question is, what stories aren't being told when those are the only stories that are told, right? When women are represented in a specific way, and when it's always about, like y'all are bringing up needing to be saved by a man, or needing to have a relationship in order to be validated. And some of the impacts that I see in some of the work that I do, and with the girls that I work with, is this competition between girls, and honestly between women, right? Even grown women, for the male gaze. There's so much girl on girl hate. There's so much drama. There's so much feeling of inadequacy, or not feeling sure of yourself, or maybe the decisions that you're making, because of the stories that we've been told over and over. And it's so deeply ingrained because we've seen this from such a young age, and that becomes our normal. That becomes what's expected of us. Like Melissa said, we don't even notice that it's happening. So we may not even grow up to realize that it's a problem, right? We may not think that not having a speaking role, we may not even notice it, or we may not notice that women of color rarely get the lead role, that disabled women are literally absent from most of these narratives, right? Or that most of the stories we see about LGBTQIA folks are about coming out, right? That the identity of a queer person is only the story of them coming out. And that's why we do the work that we do, right? Is I think it's important to develop the kind of critical thinking skills that y'all are showing right now, to look beyond and beneath the surface of things that we've come to accept and taken for granted for as long as we can remember, right? We need spaces where we can question, and we can discuss, how this representation is impacting us, and how it's impacting us, and how we view ourselves, how we view each other, how we treat each other, and also, how it's impacting us on a systemic level, which is then where we could talk about patriarchy and heteronormativity, which, I'm sure will come up a little later in the episode.
Yeah, for sure. And when you talk about girl on girl hate, which so often comes about because of things we are exposed to from a young age, like Disney's representation of relationships, where the women are constantly competing for male attention, and that girl on girl hate can lead to a decrease in self confidence. And low self confidence can give girls negative moods, such as depression, anxiety, anger, and they can have trouble with friendships and or relationships, and doubt their physical and mental abilities, which impairs their academic and job performances, which gets even worse when they see that they are not found as well, when they do not do as well in their academic or job performances, because they doubt themselves even more.
Yeah, I totally agree. And on a friendship and relationship level, when someone has low self-esteem, it's really easy for them to be manipulated because when you have low self-esteem, we often look to other people to make us feel better. For example, receiving compliments. And when someone is in that low point of self-esteem, everything someone says to them takes a toll. With their own confidence down, it's easy for someone to swoop in and take advantage of their state and make them feel really bad about themselves. Having low self-confidence is a weak spot because it creates vulnerability in relationships, both with friends and a partner.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing up relationships, Naya, because I think a lot about that around holidays like Valentine's Day, right? And the massive marketing that goes behind a day like Valentine's Day.
For sure.
Every year around this time, if you're single, you're reminded by everything, right? By ads, by movies, cartoons, chocolates at the checkout counter, that you probably should be finding somebody. You're reminded that you need to have a Valentine, right? And I see how young girls the same age as Nava and Naya are already impacted by that as middle schoolers, right? And I remember actually when I moved to the United States that how much that really stuck out to me. How in sixth grade or even in seventh grade, girls were already getting really or were already having that low self-esteem around this, right? And we're already worried about getting a gift that day or worried about somebody making a formal ask to be their Valentine. And that really struck me because why are young girls already having to stress about that, right? Why are we already feeling that our sense of worth so is around this holiday and is around if somebody chooses us on this holiday? And that's because the media created this expectation. That's because the media spent billions of dollars to make even more dollars in order to advertise the holiday and push for all the things that could be bought and consumed around this holiday.
Yeah, it's just so interesting, like how it starts extremely young. As Nava said, low self-confidence can really lead to less access to jobs, especially like in a career in journalism. And something else that falls under that umbrella category of TV and film is journalism. And more specifically, it's that amount of women, the amount of women who are in that field as reporters, journalists, and news broadcasters. And just like, I have some interesting stats about that because 24% of people read about, or seen in newspaper, TV, and radio are women. And that makes a glass ceiling. That glass ceiling exists for women news reporters in newspaper bylines and newscast reports. And another statistic that I found was that 30%, 37% of stories were reported by women in 2015. And like as those years have progressed, those numbers haven't changed that much. And that glass ceiling really means that it's the obstacles that women face in that field and the opportunities that are taken away from them because of their gender. Despite that like democratizing promise of digital media, women's poor representation in traditional news media is also reflected in the digital news world, with women making up only 26% of the people in internet news stories and media news tweets. And then a final fact that I have for y'all is that only 4% of traditional news and digital news stories clearly challenge gender stereotypes. And so, among other factors, stereotypes and that significant underrepresentation of women in media, they play a significant role in shaping harmful attitudes of disrespect and violence towards women. So, journalism, as it is today, it's dominated by male voices. And we all know that the person who's telling that story has a great influence on how it comes across to the audience. So, Anya, what do you think the value of having a female voice telling stories in the journalism world? How big of a value do you think that is?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, first off, I really want to highlight what you're saying, Melissa, that we know that whoever tells the story has a great influence on what comes across. And that's one of the foundational questions of the work that we do at About Face is really looking at who gets to tell the story and how much that matters because there's so much story behind storytelling. So in journalism, for example, we have to question whose perspectives are we hearing the news from? Who makes the edits in the production rooms, what parts of the interviews get included and what parts of the interviews get taken out in that process, and who is always elevated as a trustworthy source, right? And as you're saying, a lot of that is actually coming from male voices. And we also know that mainstream news tend to uphold the status quo, right? And only rarely reports on facts from the perspective of folks who have actually been marginalized historically. So I personally think that having more women in these positions would inevitably influence what's happening backstage, and it would also widen the amount of perspectives that are included in the stories that are being told. I think you spoke of a glass ceiling for women, right? And and we also have to look at how much tougher that is for women of color, for Black and Indigenous women, for trans women, queer women, disabled women, migrant women, right? Those women rarely get opportunities to tell our own stories or to report about what's actually happening in our communities from our own lived experiences and our own perspectives, right? Instead, all we hear, again through a lot of the media that we consume and through how the news are told, that men, and mostly white men at that, are the ones we should trust and are the ones that we should listen to. And we get that from news, we get that from the types of films that are being created, we get that from looking at who owns a lot of the media conglomerate today, down to the textbooks that we study in school, right? And to bring back another point, which to me is just, it's really wild, that women journalists are often sexualized, right? As if the only way to become a news anchor is to fit the Eurocentric beauty ideals, to have perfect makeup, to wear low-cut shirts, to look the part, if you will, because that's apparently what society wants to see. And when you really break that down, that's toxic on so many levels. And so I really do think that having more female voices telling story, and diverse female voices telling the stories of what's happening in the world, and especially in a field that's supposed to be very unbiased, right, would bring a lot of value to that field.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, you mentioned when we hear a story or read an article about, for example, Black or Indigenous women, trans women, disabled women, it's pretty likely that we're hearing it or reading it as it is told by a white man. And like you said, it's rare that these stories are actually informed by the knowledge and the wisdom of those who have the lived experiences, right? And instead, these people's stories are being taken and twisted to fit a certain narrative that often is upholding systems that don't serve them, right? And so I think when we talk about centering the voices of these people, what we mean is give them the opportunity to tell their own stories. How often do you hear a story or a news report told directly by a disabled woman of color? You don't, right? That doesn't happen as often as it should. And this is when we start to realize that what we need and what we're working for is representation that's intersectional. So it's not just women represented, right? We want Indigenous women, we need migrant women, Muslim women, queer women, and we need them represented accurately and consistently, and it needs to come from their stories. So there was this little test that was created. It's called the Bechdel's test. It was created by Alison Bechdel, and it's supposed to be kind of this gauge to determine what women representation looks like specifically in fiction, so movies or books or TV shows. So in order to pass this test, a movie has to meet 3 criteria. It has to, 1, have at least 2 women, 2, these 2 women have to talk to each other, and 3, their conversation has to be about something other than a man. So obviously the bar is very, very low to pass this test, but surprisingly, about half of movies fail this test. So just for example, despite all of its kick-ass female characters, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 does not pass the test. And this is one of my all-time favorite movies. I still watch this movie all the time, but I am very disappointed that it doesn't do our female characters justice. I don't know about y'all, but I would kill for a real deep, conversation between Hermione and Professor McGonagall, or Luna and Mrs. Weasley. So this one really surprised me, but yeah, there's so many more.
Same, Brianna. Like, I'm down to have that conversation. But like something else that I found like surprisingly doesn't pass that test is Shrek, like the first movie. It only meets 1 out of the 3 criteria by having 3 female characters, like Fiona, Cinderella, and Snow White, but they never speak at all during the first movie. But something good is that the second and third movies do pass that. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, and before y'all start arguing with me about Harry Potter, just a little comment, like if there's a scene where one woman makes a comment to another woman, that is not a conversation. That does not count. But yeah, it can be really discouraging when we're fighting for truly representative media. Our goal, I believe, is to have intersectional and diverse representation. But how do we get to that point of this consistent, empowering representation when directors and scriptwriters won't even bother to have two nuanced female characters in their film to care about something other than a guy? So I guess my question for you, Enya, is when we're discouraged or if we're feeling like we're not going to reach that point of accurate representation for everybody, what can we do to remind ourselves that we do have the power to keep pushing towards that ultimate goal, even if the progress seems slow, you know?
Such a good question, Brianna. And so, I mean, we have literally been taught to stop looking out for each other and to stop recognizing the power that we have as women, right? Because literally, women coming together and supporting each other is one of the biggest threats to the status quo. And there's something so very powerful about sisterhood and us really having each other's backs and really uplifting each other, right? Again, media really plays on these stories of women competing and tearing each other down, often in order to get to the dude or to support the dude or whatever, because telling a different story would take away a lot of its power, right? A lot of the power that media has, a lot of the ways that things have been done, right? And if I can, when I look at the organizing spaces that I've been in, and that's, you know, a lot of racial and social and economic justice organizing, it's the women holding it down. And it's usually the women who have experienced the most oppression, right? So the ones with the most intersectional identities, if you will. We're the ones making the meetings happen. We're the ones putting together the agenda. We're the ones taking care of folks, getting the people out into the streets. It is literally sisters that make the world go round, right? From our kitchens and from the circles, from the tea that we share, and that since the beginning of time. And I think that us reminding ourselves of that and us supporting each other and us uplifting each other and us just validating and seeing each other is such a big part of that. And I really want to lift up the work that Gen Z, of what your generation has done, because it's tremendous. Y'all have created such tremendous change. And, you know, to bring it back to Harry Potter for a second, you just reminded me of something, that the author of Harry Potter actually got called out for some extremely transphobic statements that she made. So again, when we're talking about this intersectional identity and talking about how to uplift women, it's also like, let's not leave some of our sisters behind, right? And the power of Gen Z is that they didn't let her get away with it, right? As soon as she made those statements, the internet went wild, and there were memes and there were call outs, and there was so much that happened of like, oh no, we're not letting you get away with that. And I think that so many of the shows that are coming out today, for example, and so many of the conversations that are happening today are a testament to the demands that y'all are making. It's a testament to the conversations that y'all are having. It's a testament to y'all actually reminding each other that you do have power, and you using the tools that you have at your disposal, like social media, right? It's obvious that y'all want to see more authentic representations. It's obvious that y'all want to see stories that reflect your reality, and you're asking for characters that are complex. You're asking for characters that aren't completely defined by a facet of their identity, right? So if you're a trans character, your story isn't just about your process of coming out as trans. Your story is about who you are as a complex human being. And so I think that there's so many examples out in the world happening right now in real time that hopefully, you know, to anybody who's listening today who may not feel that and who may feel a little down right now listening, it's like there actually is a lot of change happening, and it's all around us. And so please turn to you know, to the folks who are doing that work and who have pushed those conversations forward.
Yeah, it's a wonderful reminder. Like, you can find media that will represent you or even just lift you up, empower you if you look for it, even if it doesn't seem like it's right there, accessible, you know. But I agree with you so much that there's so much power we hold when we can raise our voices collectively and support each other. One of the things that my little circle of girlfriends that we do for each other is we constantly remind each other and ourselves that there isn't one specific way that we have to look or act, kind of like the media and advertisements in particular so often try to convince us. So taking it back in time a little bit, we've all seen those ads from the 50s or the 60s that are super sexist, right? I saw one of these old school ads just the other day. It was for some kitchen appliance, and the selling line was, "It does everything but the cooking. That's what wives are for." And I always get so shocked by these things. I always think to myself, thank goodness there's not stuff like that around today. I would be so heated all the time. But then I turn around and I see an ad on Instagram for some weight loss product, and it has a picture of a thin woman with perfect hair, perfect skin. And I compare myself to that idealized woman, and it makes me think less of myself. And I think sometimes our society likes to pretend that we've moved beyond sexist stereotypes and degrading advertisements. And we have to some degree, but I think they're definitely still here. The objectification is still happening. It's just like a tiny bit more discreet. And advertisers are continuing to create this stereotypical idea of who a woman's supposed to be, what she's supposed to look like. And I think it's a marketing technique because, and it's something I've been working on this year to kind of call out and recognize. But because when advertisers can make a woman feel like there's something about her that needs to be fixed because they don't look like that stereotypical woman that's in the ad, then we'll buy a product, right? If we feel like there's something about our body that needs fixing, we'll buy a product to fix it, and those companies get money.
Exactly. Like you said, Brianna, the objectification of women is still happening nowadays. Recently, I've seen something happen involving actress Milana Vaintrub, and she's appeared on hit shows like This Is Us, but many know her as Lily, who is the friendly employee from AT&T commercials. She's kind of like the whole face of the company. And she recently revealed in an Instagram Live an upsetting and violent experience that she's gone through. So last week, social media users were kind of like rediscovering her AT&T videos, and they began to post a slew of objectifying memes and comments of the actress on those posts, and they kind of used and like distorted a lot of her old photos. Some posts received hundreds of thousands of likes. They spurred thousands of comments about her appearance, and they also added these really abhorrent like milk emojis. And I just thought it was appalling. But she had an Instagram Live, and she said maybe it just has to do with being a person on the internet, or maybe it's specific to being a woman on the internet. But all of these comments, she said this before pausing to read several of these explicit comments as they were appearing on the screen of her live, because these people kept on commenting those disgusting things. She said like it really hurts her feelings, and I just feel terrible that social media can also just be a place of like toxicity and hurt feelings. So Enya, in your work, what ways have you seen predatory, degrading advertisements like these that they create problems for girls? And like, what can we do to help girls spot those lies and just like acknowledge them as such?
Yeah, unfortunately, thank you for that question. Unfortunately, it's not just like it's not, we see this all the time, right? And I think it's because we're looking at a systemic problem. And I agree with what Brianna said of, times have changed to an extent since the 50s and the 60s, but I still see it all the time, right? How young women are sexualized, how young women of color and Black girls specifically are sexualized, or how they're treated as adults when they're still young girls, because what we're looking at is a system, right? We live within a system of patriarchy. We live within a system of male dominance. We live in a system of heteronormativity, right? Where this behavior towards girls and towards women has been normalized and accepted, right? So even though it has gotten better, and again, mostly to activism and public pressure and people speaking out, the idea that sex sells is still very much prevalent. You could see it in the way that clothes and accessories and perfumes or even diet products are advertised and then sold, right? It's always about how much skin is showing, or how women's bodies are presented and objectified. Y'all were in my program, so you might remember some of the ads that I showed you, over this past summer, where sometimes all you could see is a woman's legs, right? Or all you could see is a woman's lips. And that's what we mean by literally objectifying women, like turning their body parts into objects, or the fact that a lot of women, or in a lot of these advertisements, the way the woman is postured, right, where she's not directly facing the camera. Like there's so many techniques, and Brianna brings that up, right? The marketing techniques that are being used, and it's everywhere. It's from how they're selling lingerie from Victoria's Secrets to how they're promoting a famous actress on the cover of a teen magazine, right? And so what we do in order to support girls is we look at all different types of media, and we ask questions. We ask critical questions. Part of what we're trying to do is not give the answers. We're really promoting and encouraging girls to think for themselves. And so we'll ask questions about what's happening both on the screen or on the images that we're seeing, and also behind the scenes, right? What's the message? What's being sold here? And sometimes it's not just a product that's being sold, right? It's a whole idea, it's a whole lifestyle, it's a whole social norm, right? And then how is it being sold? And how does the person who's making the media, how do they want you to feel? And the deeper you get into it, the more you notice these patterns. And again, the more you notice these techniques that they're using. And the more that you recognize, the deeper that you go, the more that you recognize the intentions behind the products that are being sold. And again, the stories that were being told, right? And the more that you can see things for what they are, the more you're seeing all the ways in which the media has been, in a way, secretly conditioning us. And that's actually what we call the secret education of media, that we've been receiving messages about how the world is supposed to be, and about how we're supposed to behave, and how we're supposed to look, since childhood. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, which I know can feel a little overwhelming and even depressing at times. I know that I have a lot of girls come up to me and tell me, like, I can never watch a show without noticing all the things that are wrong with it now, and I just can't just sit back and enjoy myself. And trust me, I know, right? But at the same time, um it's better for us to know, right? Because it really does give us tremendous power. It really gives us an opportunity to choose, what is it that I'm going to consume, who is it that I'm going to support, and what is it that I'm going to allow to come into my psyche, which will then lead to moments like this one, where we have four amazing young girls like yourselves, young teens like yourself, who are creating your own podcast and who are asking questions that even some adults are still struggling to see and answer for themselves today.
I totally agree with you. So over the summer, Enya gave us an example of Fashion Nova, a specific company whose ads are very stereotypical and are not diverse at all. So Victoria's Secret is another company who is definitely not committed to diversifying their advertisements. So another company that does this is Brandy Melville. They don't diversify their advertisements, and they also have this one size fits all controversy. It can really lead to low self-esteem in girls because they don't fit into the tiny sizes that Brandy Melville offers. So one thing also to know is that Fashion Nova, Victoria's Secret, Brandy Melville, all these companies are owned by men. So not only do they not diversify their advertisements, but they're also owned by men. So all of these companies have a large presence on social media, so their ads are constantly popping up when we're scrolling through Instagram or Twitter. When brands and companies frame the thin body as the ideal body type, this is an advertising technique. So, Enya, there what do you think there is about these advertisements that are pushing forward these unrealistic body standards, and what makes them so successful and enticing? And another question is, how can we push back against these companies and start supporting brands that are truly representative of every skin color and body type?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. That's a great question, and I think that the reason they're so successful is because they know what works, and they've been literally spending many hours of research, and many, what, billions, millions of dollars every year to look at what works, right? They're testing out ads, they're again doing research, they're using focus groups, they're collecting all of our personal data, right? Every time we make any kind of move digitally, we're literally giving them information about who we are and what we like, so that they can know exactly what to sell to us. They even know what to sell to us at what time of day. I'm sure that y'all have had that experience of like you walk into a store and then all of a sudden on your Instagram you get an ad pop up about the store that you were just in, right? Which is very creepy. But the point is that they've been pushing things in the way that works. And again, we've been taught from a young age that beauty looks a certain way, right? That this particular body type, that this particular skin tone is what is beautiful. And we have to remember that this beauty standard has been defined mostly by 35 to 35-year-old white men who are the ones who are running these businesses, who are the ones who are designing and creating the social media platforms that we're using every single day, right? And that's all that they offer. They offer this as a beauty ideal. That's the status quo we're expected to live by. That's the dominant narrative. So that's what we're consuming and that's what we're taught to believe. But I think just even having these conversations and having these reminders that this isn't actually true, right? It's not inherent to our nature to believe that white skin is more beautiful than dark skin. That was created systematically and it hasn't always been this way. And that again, it's systemic, right? We live in a system that was created and we live in a system that where the people who are at the top are committed to keeping their power and making more and more dollars, right? And I think as far as what we could do about it, I think social media again has given us a way out in a lot of ways, right? Because we can use social media in so many ways to educate ourselves, to hear each other's perspectives and offer other perspectives. We can use it to challenge one another, and as we continue to learn from each other, we can use it as a form of expression to express our own opinions, of using our own voice. Because we know that the education that we receive, what we've been taught in school, what we've been taught in mainstream media, only gave us access to, again, a very limited perspective, right? From the cartoons we've been talking about, the films, mainstream news, we've been given a very limited view of how the world works and how it came to be. And one of the things that social media does for us is it gives us a way to name things, and it gives us a way to actually look at what the problem is, because we can't actually solve a problem until we know that there's a problem, right? So I think recognizing that this is not the way it has to be, that this is not the ultimate definition of beauty, having language to that, having access to an analysis to understand that, and then be able to share that. And we're at a point now where we can learn and we can be inspired by what somebody is doing on the other side of the planet in real time, right? So I've seen that happen a lot. I know that Victoria's Secret in, I believe it was 2018, they had a really problematic fashion show, and they got called out by people all over the country and then all over the world. And because of that, they actually issued a statement and they issued an apology, right? And so that was a moment where the power of the people coming together and using digital media was able to put tremendous amounts of pressure on the same day, in some cases, or at least in the same week, and really force that company to apologize because they were acting out of line. And I think that that's how we can get them to commit to do something different. And then I think also social media gives us access to so many other brands and so many other so many other options for representation that feels better.
I completely agree with you. And similarly, the influence of social media that it holds is so huge that it can pressure some girls and young women to change themselves to look like those that they're following on social media. And a big example of this is Snapchat. Snapchat has a large teen and adolescent following. They have these beauty filters that are promoting Eurocentric beauty standards. So let's go over some examples. So one of the filters on Snapchat is the saturation filter. The saturation filter only works for certain skin tones, and I think it's bizarre that there are some filters that are only made to work on certain skin tones. Over 60% of Snapchat's users consist of 13 to 17-year-olds. The altered images that are caused by filters can lead to low self-confidence. Many filters, such as the flower crown, may look so simple, but it actually narrows your nose, makes your eyes bigger, and smooths out your face. Many teens are undergoing plastic surgery to make their face look like the Snapchat filters, but these filters are promoting Eurocentric beauty standards, which isn't the ideal form of beauty.
Yeah, similar to what you mentioned, Naya. I think that people who influence a lot of this toxic media culture is the Kardashian family, like more specifically like Kylie Jenner and Kim Kardashian. And they're prominent figures in Gen Z culture. Teens and young girls, they often look up to them as role models and they think that they're empowering. And as you were saying, like some are even going to the lengths of getting plastic surgery to look just like them. But what they don't know is that members of the family have publicly admitted to photoshopping or like face tuning their Instagram posts. And also those reality TV shows such as Keeping Up with the Kardashians, the Kardashian beauty line of cosmetics such as Kylie Cosmetics or KKW, their fashion brands like Skims, and like their social media accounts, they really truly set high standards of beauty that are unrealistic and unobtainable by the average American person, girl, or woman. Failing to emulate that popular Kardashian woman's like body shapes, like the hair and makeup regimen. Like a fun fact is that I think Kim Kardashian's skincare routine is like $4,500, which is so expensive. There are also their clothing choices. They can lead girls and women to overly focus on their exterior, developing body and self-image issues.
Like you said, Melissa, that whole culture sets up for horrible stereotypes. In talking about stereotypes, let's dive into hair stereotypes. There are many negative stereotypes about women and their hair, and one of these stereotypes is dumb blondes. Women who are blonde have been seen as not smart or dumb. A woman on one of her dates, the man said to her, "Well, you don't look clever," just based on her hair color. Another hair stereotype is how people say that straight hair is better than natural curly hair. Women have been straightening their hair and sometimes turning it into a permanent change just because of what other people think of it. Everyone's hair is special and it looks perfect in its natural way and color.
I totally agree with you. And another thing that women and girls use a lot is makeup. So sometimes when makeup is advertised, especially on social media, the concealer and foundation shades are displayed with lots of different options. But when you actually go to the store, there are many, many shades for the lighter skin tones. And then for the medium to darker skin tones, there are maybe two or three options. And this can be really just upsetting to girls who have darker skin tones, and there's nothing wrong with that. We just need to be able to represent everyone's skin tone and makeup. So a specific brand is Beauty Blender, and they have so many light shades and maybe only 2 to 3 darker or medium shades.
Yeah, so girls often compare themselves to people like the Kardashians, or as you were saying, Naya, those with a nicer complexion than them, and that can be damaging to self-confidence, as we talked a little bit earlier. So Anya, what can we do as individuals to remind ourselves that we are beautiful just the way we are, and we don't need to compare ourselves to people like the Kardashians?
First off, I just want to say I am so impressed by how thorough y'all are, because y'all are really bringing in all of these different facets and all these different aspects of how representation is out there, is impacting us on the inside, and I love that. And then just a quick little note on Kim Kardashian. How often has Kim Kardashian been called out for blackfishing, right? Which is the idea of wanting to appear black, right? The idea of wearing makeup that makes you look darker than you are, which a lot of either light-skinned women of color or white women have done, which is appalling in itself, right? Especially if you look at the history of blackface in movies in this country, which is for another episode, I'm sure. And the idea of on the other side of that, of colorism, right? Which is what we're talking about in terms of these Eurocentric beauty ideals, that the closer you are to white, then the prettier you're supposed to be. And so, I'm removed in the sense that, as you mentioned at the very beginning of this segment, Melissa, that Gen Z has been really impacted by women like Kim Kardashian, and I'm a little removed from Gen Z, a few years removed, but it's also to look at who is it that we're trying to compare ourselves to, who is it that we're trying to emulate, and who is it that we're trying to be like, because Kim Kardashian is a human with her human flaws and her human faults, and in this case, some anti-blackness that she needs to look at, right? In some ways that she's being extremely disrespectful to the Black and African American community. So just to note that, right? Like us trying to compare ourselves to perfection that is not perfect. And I think that we just need to do more of what y'all are doing right now, right? There needs to be more spaces for women to get to express themselves, for women and girls and queer and trans and gender expansive folks and anybody who doesn't fall within this like typical Eurocentric beauty norm, and even the ones that do actually, like, how are we creating spaces to express ourselves, to recognize our own worth, to recognize our own value, to uplift each other, right? To make decisions every single day about what we allow to populate our feeds. What we need to be real about that. We need to be real about what accounts are actually healthy for us to follow. I know, Brianna, you mentioned at the beginning, like watching some images that then may not make you feel good about yourself, and then being able to recognize that as you have, and then being able to be like, you know what, I'm not going to follow this account anymore, right? And what kind of messages, what kind of information do I want to be receiving? What kind of messages do I want to be taking in? And how do I keep finding moments to affirm myself and my own beauty in ways that are not also so typical, right? Of like, my beauty is according to what this beauty standard is, because as cliche as it sounds, beauty really does come from the inside, right? And so in terms of like what we take in, we really need to surround ourselves with people both online and in person that appreciate us, that treat us with respect and dignity. And I would say, most importantly, we need moments of quiet to tap into what we know and to find ourselves. There's something that I heard recently from this meditation app that I just got hip to recently, and it said, you can only find your true self in stillness. And that really resonates with me, right? That the only way for me to truly be at peace, and the only way for me to truly see and love myself is in that quiet where I am with myself, right? Where I'm reminded that the only approval I ever need is my own, where I'm reminded that I am a unique, beautiful, powerful expression of life, that we are literally made up of the sacred elements of water, earth, air, and fire, that you are literally made of stardust, right? Because of course we're all beautiful. And all of my brown, Algerian, Muslim, queer, fat aunties and grandmothers before me, all of them, right, were beautiful. All of them are beautiful. And I think that all of the moments that we can remind ourselves that we truly are worthy, and that we can remind ourselves that we don't have to believe the media's lies, is a way forward to loving ourselves. And there's lots of amazing Instagram accounts for you to follow. And I was gonna drop some, but maybe we'll drop some in the caption. But yeah, there's lots of people out there that are promoting self-love and self-acceptance and self-worth, and you just have to find what your medicine is, and you just have to find what the right formula for yourself is. Like, what is it that's going to make you feel good about yourself when you're scrolling on Instagram, and who is going to remind you that you're a beautiful creation, you're a beautiful expression of life, and we get to work on ourselves, and we get to build ourselves up every single day, but the most important thing is you are going to be with you for the rest of your days. And so how do you find places and moments and opportunities to value yourself and to love yourself?
Yes, love it, Anya. Thank you so much for giving us like all those tips and techniques to combat those toxic messages. And especially thanks for reminding us of our own value and worth. We'll also leave those Instagram handles, everything that you've mentioned, in the description of our Spotify and our YouTube podcast. So to wrap it up, thanks so much to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to Anya for stopping by. I just want to do a little shout out and like call to action. If you want to educate yourself and hear more about powerful and intersectional women in media, check out the Call Your Girlfriend podcast. Call Your Girlfriend aims to highlight every kind of women, but with an intersectional feminist outlook. They interview women who are movers and shakers, but also give the spotlight to non-famous women with stories worth sharing. Smart and entertaining, it's perfect for your morning commute or any time, really. I recently just listened to their episode called Use the Power You Have, and it was so empowering and just really made me reflect on what I've done to the world and how I can do my part to create change.
Thanks for shouting out a fellow podcast, Melissa. I love it. I'll definitely be listening to Call Your Girlfriend podcast.
Yes.
But another way that you can kind of combat the toxic media messages and fight for better representation, if you are a creator, if you're an artist, a painter, filmmaker, musician, whatever it is, create inclusive content that highlights the beauty and diversity and uplifts women and LGBTQ plus folks and all marginalized people, other underrepresented groups of people. And in these works, as always, remember to center the voices of the people who are being underrepresented, who have those lived experiences. Always give credit to those whose stories you're telling. But don't underestimate that sheer power that you have in your creations of your art or your movies. All of those creations have power. So that's a way that you can lift up your own voice and use it.
Yes, please check out at About Faith SF on Instagram. We're also on Twitter. For the older folks, we're also on Facebook, and we have a website as well. We're always doing programs, and if you're looking for, programs like the one that these girls got to do with us over the summer, please join us. Also, keep an eye out. We are going to have a youth action squad, which is essentially a youth advisory board where we're going to work with a group of girls for 6 months to a year. This will be paid. There will be a stipend for your time. And you will get to work closely with our staff, closely with the girls that we do programs with over the summer, and you will actually get to help inspire and also bring your own contributions and your own ideas into the programs that we do through About Faith. So please check us out at About Faith SF, and please get in touch with us if you're interested.
Thank you everyone for tuning in to today's episode of the Girls in Action podcast. For more information about what we do here at Girls in Action, or for any updates regarding our new blog, go check out our Instagram at girlsinaction.sf. Give us a follow. You can also subscribe to our blog by going to girlsinactionsf.blogspot.com and hitting the subscribe button at the top of the homepage. We hope you all have a wonderful rest of your winter break, get some good rest, and we're wishing you a safe, happy, and healthy new year.
Bye.
Bye.